have a couple of event handlers that allow us to either add content or delete content. Right? How about instead of adding this new course always having the same new course title? How about we are allowed to perhaps provide the title of the course as we add to this array of courses? So for instance, we would like to have maybe an input field in the HTML right above this input field, maybe an input. Right, that would allow us to type in the title of the course and then create that course with that title. Right, so let's do that. So what we're going to do is that we're going to bind the input field. We need to bind it to a state variable, just like we do in React. Right, we need to somehow bind it. In Angular, it's pretty easy. In the TypeScript, we're going to declare a state variable. We'll call it maybe new course title, and we're going to initialize it with an empty string. Title. And the way this is bound, right, the way we can reference this, right, and bind it so that as we type, right, we want to be able to change that state, right, without the on change or any of that, right? We want to just reference it. So to reference it, we're going to use, again, another attribute, right, that's provided by Angular called the ng model. So the ng model allows us to bind variables, right, are declared in the TypeScript, and like the name suggests, a model. I'm tying this input field to a model variable, right, that lives on the state and the component, right. So I can say that I can bind it to the new course title. Now it's bound, right? It's bound, meaning anything that I type into this input field will be accessible to that variable, and anyone who's referencing that variable will be notified if it changes. Okay, but notice that it's complaining, saying that putting a squiggly line under the ng model, right? And that's because that by default, right, the library or the module that implements a form manipulation, right, it's not loaded by default, right? So we need to import the form manipulation library. Angular has grown over time. In the last decade or so, and it has grown so much that they've been splitting up different behaviors and different features into dedicated separate libraries, right? And by default, this one is not loaded. Just like the router, it used to be that it was not loaded by default. Now they ask you, when you're instantiating, when you're implementing, creating the application at the first. Anyway, so the way we're going to import that module, we're going to go into the app modules here. The app modules is a TypeScript file that was generated for us. Right? We haven't touched it yet. It's a configuration file. It's a file where it's a global file that allows you to install new libraries, import new stuff that are globally available. Right? In particular, this is the browser module, right? And the routing. Sorry, the app routing module. This was created at the first when it asked us, do you want routing? And we said yes, right? That's all it did, right? It made an entry in there in this array, right? It also created this routing file, which we'll see in a minute. All right, so we want to import a couple other things, right? We want to import the form manipulation, right? So we can interact with input fields, drop downs, checkboxes, radio buttons, right? Text areas. So to do that, we need to import another module called the forms module. See that? The forms module. There it is. Now we can interact with forms. If we go back to our component, notice that we no longer have the squiggly underneath. See that? So let's go back to our HTML. We can now type there. Well, we could type earlier as well, but now it's bound to that variable. How do I know that's bound? Well, we can reference that variable somewhere else. Maybe we can reference it somewhere else, like maybe h3 down here. Right? We can use double curly brackets, and we can reference that state variables and check to see if indeed it's changing over time. Right? So notice that now if I type, notice that indeed whatever I do to that variable, it's being notified. Anywhere where that variable is dereferenced, right, will be notified. So even if I put it down here, maybe right, h1, right, wherever that variable is referenced, right, the DOM is being notified that it has changed and that it needs to re-render itself. Okay, so all that plumbing is already done for us, right? We don't have to do any of that. We don't have to do an on change or any of that. We just tie it to that variable. Anyway, so we have that new course. What we could do is that in the create course, we could just pass as an argument the title, right? So that in the create course, we can receive the title of that course, right? Although it's kind of an overkill because I already have the state variable there, but nevertheless, it's always a good practice to use pass arguments, right, through a function, so you know the dependencies are explicit, as opposed to using somewhat more global and more general access to side effects, right? So this is a better implementation to than just using the state variable. Okay. So now that I have the title being passed to me as an argument, I can just use this. Instead of hard coding this, I can use here title. Okay, and so now if I go back and I say here new course, I can say create course. Now notice that it adds it down here. See that? Or I can say CS 5610 adds it right there. CS 5200 adds it right there. See that? And I can still remove the courses as I go. Everybody good? All right.